Biomutant, made by Experiment 101, published by THQ Nordic. You'll find this game on PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, Xbox Series X and S, Xbox One and Windows. A title that on both last gen and next gen was made by 25 people from the former Avalanche Studios, which were responsible for the Just Cause series. Biomutant is a game that touts revolutionary character creation, a tribal war system, and fluid gameplay. All the gameplay that you're going to see on the screen is Biomutant gameplay on PC, and let's find out if the Biomutant trailer was close to the actual consumer experience. And without further ado, here is the Biomutant review. Let's break it down. "4K, 60 FPS, Biomutant achieves it, on PC at least, and boy is it a treat. Coasting the waves as the sun reflects off the surface of the water as it ripples gently beneath your jet ski to the frosty mountains with snowflakes serenely drifting down as they slowly edge towards the floor." Biomutant contains a variety of different biomes, each of them reflecting a different element in-game. Whether it be a moonlit valley or a blazing village, you'll find that the game sets the tone incredibly well using saturated color palettes generously. For a game that was made by such a small team, the amount of work that's been put into the graphics is jaw-dropping. It's unusual to find games with such fidelity outside of a AAA group. Naturally, having this level of detail is very expensive and time-consuming, and I can only imagine the amount of vigorous hours it took to craft this world to be as beautiful as it is. And make no mistake, the game is beautiful, if we're referring to the exterior of the game world. Unfortunately, the interior buildings are often drab and uninspiring. Whether this is done by design though, I'm unsure. On one hand, it could be the case that the drab interior was made in such a way that is intentionally designed to sharply contrast the outside world, one that has sprung to life with the extinction of humans. This interior serves to portray how ugly the world was before it was torn apart by the corporation draining the planet's resources and polluting it simultaneously, whereas afterwards the outside world has grown in such a way that planet and animal life has flourished, naturally bringing colour and vibrancy. Or perhaps the budget for the game was mostly for the outside world. The reason I say this is because there's a lot of interior buildings, especially the dungeon-like levels. They are replicated and scattered throughout the different biomes. Don't get me wrong, not all the buildings are repeated, but most of them, the smaller ones especially, are. This makes it so you quickly become used to seeing these interiors over and over again, which only serves to make you want to stay outside all the time. We as consumers will never know the real reason for their design decisions, so anything I'm saying is purely speculation. But what I can say for certain is that the world is stunning, but not only the world. The character models are well crafted, with the fur on each of them flowing and swaying naturally as the wind sifts through each strand and fibre of their model. It's truly impressive, and it even has its own setting. The character creator is incredibly versatile, and it highlights the detail on the fur as you change colours, patterns, and you can change this later if you get bored of your look. The gear isn't as great, however. There are hundreds of parts which you can collect and combine, and so for obvious reasons it stands out they wouldn't all look as great. The chest, the shoulder pads, the legs and the face mask all look the part, no pun intended. However, I felt that the hat gear was a little out of place, looking a little off and awkwardly sitting on the characters' heads. This is only amplified when you see a random NPC with a randomly generated outfit. I get that the world is supposed to be absurd and quirky, and that things should look a little odd, but as someone who likes to wear hats and hoods in games, I would have liked a little more detail. Lastly, let's talk about the special effects, whether it be from the enemies or yourself. Most projectile non-elemental weapons have the same look to them, whether it be the shotgun, rifle, auto rifle or pistols. The bullets, for the most part, look the same and have mostly uninspiring designs. Whereas the counterparts, the elemental weapons and the crafting components have a lot of flair. If you're firing bullets from these elemental guns, you can be sure to see a fireworks display, whether it be bolts of electricity sizzling through the air, fire scorching the floor beneath your enemies, or maybe crystals freezing your enemies solid as you wail on them with your massive broomstick. These effects brought a sense of vibrancy to the gameplay, and that's something I really enjoyed. The key powers, which essentially act as your magic spells, and your mutation abilities provide a similar effect. They look fantastic. One particular spell that I really liked was called Sky Spark, which essentially summons down a mini dark comet, making you feel like Sephiroth for a second. There was also a mutation ability that formed a mucus bubble around you, and with the appropriate physics to suit. The world and the special effects of Biomutant are some of its strongest aspects in my opinion, and I can see a lot of work was put into them. So the gameplay of Biomutant has been a bit of a hot topic among reviewers. Here is my take. Before I'd even purchased the game, I decided to be a mage class because, as all my friends know, I'm always the mage. I went in with the expectation that my mage abilities are going to suck, and that I'll have to work my way up to the bigger spells, just like in any other game. Although, the spells still looked amazing in 4K 60 FPS. I never really felt powerful until much later in the game. And as I ran out of energy, which is essentially the mana/stamina, I had to resort to guns and melee weapons, which is where I believe most of the issues lie with other people. I came to the understanding that the melee weapons were clearly inferior to the guns, and this was a harsh reality for those who like melee weapons. But let's break it down a little more. I think the crux of the issue stems from the lack of impact in the animations. The combat has been called floaty, which, as a fan of Kingdom Hearts and after playing the latest Kingdom Hearts 3 game, I can totally see what people mean. Many of the special moves, which are called Wang Fu, have little or no visual feedback, which in the eye of the player is a very important thing. Let's think back to games like the Souls games, where with the correct timing you could parry an enemy, stopping them dead in their tracks. It's a feeling that's satisfying. It rewards you for perfecting the timing of a mechanic. Not only does it satiate the need to improve in the game you're playing, it also gives you the correct stimulus feeding back into the gameplay loop. However, in this game you are punished for playing melee. Not only is your melee damage subpar, but the parries have little or no impact on the fight. Enemies do truck tons of damage in melee, and depending on your build you may have no health left after 2 hits. This naturally forces players to fight at a distance and rely on guns and magic. The complication lies here, I believe. Sometimes the confluence of gunplay and magic feels so great it melts through enemies as you make well-timed dodges and you execute these abilities with flashy special effects, but sometimes it falls flat. There are so many mixed signals. The player should receive the right tangible rewards for playing well in a certain way. And this feeling should be consistent, creating a feeling of involvement and immersion. This should apply to all styles, melee, magic and ranged, all at the same time. And some of the best combat games, i.e. Nier, Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, are all excellent examples of this. And this is why I feel that the reviews that discuss the combat are so eclectic in that regard. Now let's move on to the general gameplay loop. You're a biomutant tasked with either saving the world or destroying it by defeating these monsters called World Eaters. Alongside that, there are tribal wars that need to be resolved one way or the other, each tribe representing either light or dark to varying degrees. You have a narrator who dictates everything to you, conversations, world events, or even how you react as a character. I'll talk a little bit more about that though in writing and story. Firstly, you have to pick a tribe and align with the tribe's morality, and then you have to take out rival outposts, eventually leading to a fort battle. Once you do, you either take on the tribe's leader or you convince them to give up, at which point you can either lock them up or they can join you on your quest, and that's it. No, seriously, repeat that 5 more times for each tribe, doing the same outposts which only have a distinctive theme, but the interior parts of the outposts are exactly the same. I had read that this was the case prior to actually starting the tribe missions myself, but I didn't believe that all the tribe missions were exactly the same and wanted to see it for myself. And to my disappointment, it was true. But to experience the tribe system fully so I could review it thoroughly, I went through every region doing the tribe questline. Even after being given the option to unite the tribes after liberating 2 tribes and basically skipping the whole process, I thought it was important to get the whole picture for you guys. Honestly, it was a real letdown, and what's worse is that it's so monotonous. You do a couple of outpost missions which essentially let you collect some moths or poison the water supply, and it lets you take the outpost instantly. Like, what is that about? I don't understand. The dialogue is exactly the same, the entire quest line. I'm not even joking here. Believe me, I wish I was. This was such a great opportunity to create a genuinely unique experience to help fortify Biomutant's identity, and it was totally wasted. Next up, let's talk about quest design outside of the tribal war. In essence, in order to defeat the World Eaters, you must partner with an ally of the cause who has specialized machinery which is designed to help you defeat these World Eaters. You do a series of quests which involve you gathering materials from certain locations or people, and sometimes those people also need you to gather materials. What I can only call a fetch quest-a-thon that appears almost endless. You do this for almost every quest in the game that doesn't involve direct fighting. It becomes tiresome very quickly. The only thing that carried me through these moments where I was utterly fed up with the quest design was the world design. It was genuinely a pleasure to explore. I know I'm going against the tide here, but the moments in between the fetching were really enjoyable. In a world where we seek instant gratification, it can be really easy to get impatient during the quieter moments, and this also applies to video games. Many people voiced their frustration at how empty the world was, but I genuinely didn't feel that way. When I think back to games that had a similar style, I think of Outward, an absolute marvel of a game which crafted its identity in the crevices of its quiet moments. Biomutant feels similar in that sense. Despite the tedium that is the quest structure, I was entertained by reconstructing stories of the past world as I travelled through the valleys of Biomutant with its vibrant colours and phenomenal world design. I never found myself bored. Finally, character systems. The hero that you create has various stats: vitality, which governs your health; strength, which gives you higher melee damage; intelligence, which is responsible for your stamina and your magic; agility, that decides how fast you move; charisma, giving you bigger discounts and persuasion options; and your luck, which influences your crit chance and your loot drops. You then have the resistances, which essentially give you resistances to different environments, which can all be circumvented in one way or another, by the way. A collection of various currencies exists which allow you to unlock more moves or buy more spells or increase the options that you have for combat. Now, the gear that you collect in game, which can mostly be combined, dismantled or crafted, gives you a few extra options, mostly which will siphon into the free builds, magic, ranged or melee. You can attempt to mix and match, but the jack of all trades, master of none approach isn't optimal here at all. One of the strongest aspects of this game is the crafting system. There's a lot to absorb here, and get used to having a slightly more complex version of Fallout 4's crafting. It's funny though, because in spite of this crafting system, once you have found a strong weapon, I just use those for most of the game, and because the ultimate weapons you find are littered throughout most of the vaults and are easy to obtain, they make regular weapons obsolete. And don't even think about using tribal weapons. Although they have their unique fighting style and moves which I absolutely loved, they can't be upgraded in any way, shape or form, making them redundant so quickly. It's a massive shame, as the entire system, which is the tribe system, was made so you could acquire them. What a waste, and frankly it's absurd that no one thought of a way to put in a way to upgrade these systems and these weapons. Anyways, my advice is to decide on a main stat, either intelligence or strength depending on the class. I went with intelligence, then put 50 points into charisma and the rest into agility, and if you feel like you need some more health, put some into vitality. The reason I mention this though is agility dictates how fast you move within the world, and eventually you'll begin outpacing your mounts, which will make world traversal easier. Charisma will let you give yourself a good chance to succeed in dialogue checks, which is very important for the tribal missions especially. These things should help you smoothen out the rough edges of the game. There is a morality system, which in theory is great, but the execution is found wanting. There really isn't a reason to stick with one side or another, as the only thing that changes changes is a small cutscene at the end, but it's largely irrelevant as the character you play still enacts the same ending for the most part. Many of these systems haven't been fleshed out fully, and I'm pretty sure the devs are aware of it, and maybe they didn't have enough time, or maybe they had bitten off more than they could chew. There are some solid parts here, no doubt, and I'd like to see the devs learn from this going forward, and I'm sure that we'll see more from Experiment 101. Writing and story. My opening statement for this section of the review is, world design speaks for itself. Experiment 101 are clearly capable of crafting a delicious visual treat for us as gamers. I often forged my own stories about the lore using pieces of the lore that already existed in a Biomutant universe. It's not hard to fill in the gaps of a story that's about devastation wrought by a corporation who only cares about profits at the cost of the world. Saying that, due to impeccable world design, it made ingesting the less savory parts of the game a bit more bearable, but not completely. So let me elaborate. As mentioned earlier, you are a biomutant who is on the quest to either save or destroy the world you're living on by defeating those monsters called world eaters. You are accompanied by a narrator who translates everything for you, but also comments on how you feel on the world events. The narrator is actually voiced by David Shaw Parker, who is famously known for his work on Warhammer Vermintide 2, Horizon Zero Dawn, Muppets The Christmas Carol, and Mutant Year Zero. And as a fan of Vermintide 2, I absolutely loved his performance. But I'm aware this is one opinion. He undoubtedly adds charm to the game, that much is obvious, but hear me out. In a world as lush as Biomutants, with a cast of main characters that are intriguing and dripping with personality, sometimes having a narrator telling you everything can sometimes create a disconnect between the world and the story the devs are trying to tell. Now, none of these characters have voice lines, other than the literal gibberish language that they speak, so it makes it difficult to connect with them. You have a narrator translating everything, so just like in real life, language barriers can sometimes cause disconnects, and there are a lot of minute details in the way someone delivers a line that can really give grit to a performance, creating an insurmountable gravitas to someone's voice work. Think Terrence Carson, who voiced Kratos.
The hands of death could not defeat me. The sisters of fate could not hold me. And you will not see the end of this day. I will have my revenge!
Or maybe Nolan North, Troy Baker, Keith David, Jennifer Hale, or Jen Taylor. All of these talented voice actors have gifted us with tremendous performances, imprinting their voices and their characters into our hearts and minds, which is why I feel that total narration only detracts from the experience in a massive game like this. Sometimes it works really well in games like Bastion or Dear Esther, but for an open world game that hinges on the players making that connection to the vast amount of things around them, it's important to give the players tools so that they can form that connection and create that story themselves rather than it being told to them. Maybe in the next game, if there is in fact a next game, it might be nice to have the characters voiced, or at least some of them. Speaking of creating your own experiences with the game, I think that one of its best selling points is exploration. The next point is going to combine a little of gameplay and story. I think the most rewarding parts of a great open world game is discovery and reward. For instance, Ghost of Tsushima is a perfect example of that. The game rewards players for exploring by creating entire set pieces of lore and sometimes giving you a rare item, adding depth to the world. But in Biomutant there weren't really any times after scaling a massive building where I was rewarded with something that added to the story or the gameplay. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying add in loads of rewards, but what I am saying is add in small meaningful things. This could be concept art in the game portrayed as maybe a child's drawing from the past, or maybe an Easter egg, because tying exploration to a gratifying feeling rather than one of disappointment and emptiness, it has an effect on our psychology as players. We wouldn't want to go massively out of our own way if there wasn't a reason to. which is a common complaint in open world games that can be perceived as empty. The final point I'll make in regards to the writing and story revolves around the general interactions with the NPCs and the cutscene interactions. I think having more variety in NPC conversations, as well as context-sensitive dialogue, would really help with filling the role of storytelling in a game like this. Too often, NPCs that didn't have any quest lines attached to them had no meaningful dialogue, and it wouldn't matter if I traveled across the world, the dialogue would still be the same, even if the current village was being burned down by a rival tribe. All shops and vendors had exactly the same dialogue options with the same options. And look, don't get me wrong, I'm not just trying to be negative here, but I have to highlight the areas that I think need improvement. I 100% get it's a big project, but these small details really help establish the world and show the quality and attentiveness to detail, but not just in NPC interactions, because the minute details of the world really make the game what it is. Subnautica, Outward, Stardew Valley, all great games made by smallish teams. I really believe the devil is in the details in this regard. And on that note, let's talk about the cutscenes. And it's just a minor point, but one I'll bring up nonetheless. With such beautifully crafted worlds, sometimes the cutscenes felt as if they broke immersion. My own personal example was when I experienced the World Eater for the first time. It immediately put me into a cutscene without giving me time to appreciate the large model in the distance. Some of my best memories in gaming involve massive creatures moving across my screen seamlessly. Souls games, Shadow of the Colossus, Xenoblade are just a couple of examples of this. The animations in this game are amazing and the cinematics are top notch. I just really wish I had more time to appreciate them before we get down to business. And in general, I think the best principle is to explain after, not before. How does it run? Well, there's not much to say here, to be honest. It ran flawlessly on my PC with a 3080 and an i9 processor. There are a variety of different settings which you can tweak, but I personally ran everything at max and was always over 60 FPS at 4K. I'm aware of some of the issues on consoles, and I'd recommend maybe checking out some console performance reviews to get a better picture on that issue. Otherwise, though, everything ran silky smooth and was incredibly enjoyable to play, minus the gameplay issues I mentioned earlier.
Asks if you are tired, as it's a bit of a hike here from the village. He wonders if your Mooma knows you are here. Sounds like he thinks she does, despite your heart growing dark. There's nothing as powerful as a Mooma's love.
Before I even started my Biomutant review, I fell in love with the soundtrack for the game. The oriental vibes harken back to some of my favorite kung fu films like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon and Ip Man, as well as some more old school kung fu flicks like Journey to the West. I was giddy with joy upon learning that Biomutant would be Eastern themed. I have always wanted to be a kung fu panda / potentially radioactive Lombax looking creature. The soundtrack does a good job of setting the tone. My only point of contention is that we don't get to experience it enough. Too often the music either flat out doesn't work or becomes bugged, or the best parts of the soundtrack are replaced with generic battle music. It seems like the main parts of the soundtrack have been recorded with actual instruments, whereas the rest is mostly relying on MIDIs. It's a shame, and it makes those moments where you actually hear the soundtrack in all its glory stand out. As mentioned previously, I think the narrator's work was amazing. Voiced by a legendary voice actor, I couldn't ask for more from from him. It's a shame that we only get to hear him though, as the rest of the characters speak in a made up language called gibberish. And then we have the spell effects, which sounded almost Fable-like. And I know that's an odd comparison to make, but it truly is what it sounded like to me after a 30-hour playthrough. A crackling spark of lightning, cleverly named Sparkle, or the impactful sound of a small meteor hitting the floor were nice additions. Even after I had leveled my class to the point where I had near infinite magic and my magic use was frequent. Overall a good attempt at the soundtrack with some audio bugs and inconsistencies during exploration and combat, especially when it came to gunplay, which felt very empty. And as a final point, as a FYI if you will, the narrator can be turned down in the menu in case you think he talks too much. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed the review. As always, I enjoyed making it. Biomutant did a lot right, and it did a lot wrong. The good news for us is that while these smaller companies are pushing the boundaries with their new IPs, we are going to have some incredible experiences to come, especially on stuff like the PlayStation 5. I can't wait for all the new small indie titles to come out. Now, it was a really tough decision, but I had to rate this a green and amber score. This is because there are a lot of gameplay aspects and kind of the tribal system that was very almost watered down, or maybe didn't have enough impact, some repeated dialogue, stuff like that, stuff I've explained in the review already. But I think there's a real good potential for something amazing to be born, potentially with the next sequel or maybe a massive patch or DLC. This is one of those games where you have to temper your expectations depending on what you expect. If you expect to play a new IP, something, with new systems, a new look, a new feel, great. This is going to be a good game for you to buy. But again, temper your expectations. If you're unsure about how you're going to spend your money, I'd wait for a sale. It's just a safer bet. And then maybe if it comes on a subscription service, that might be an even better choice. Anyways guys, if you're new to the channel, stick around. On the next screen I'll show you what the rating means for the games, and you can use that for a future reference. The next game will be Rift Apart, which is a Ratchet & Clank game. I'm super excited for this. I've been playing all the Ratchet & Clank games throughout my life. Really pumped. So I will see you on the next breakdown for Ratchet & Clank. Stay tuned guys, and thank you once again for watching. Bye.